Recording in progress.
طيب اهلا بيكم جميعا في الويبينار بتاع النهارده. النهارده ده سادس ويبينار for the research hub، وخليني اعرفكم عن نفسي وعن the research hub سريعا. انا لينا بسيوني co-founder و managing director of the research hub، وكمان senior CML في IQVIA و clinical research educator. في الحقيقة the research hub هي أول capacity building company في مصر يعتبر focused only on the education of clinical trials and clinical research. وبنحاول as much as we can في الويبينارز نجيب لكم topics that is extremely interesting و extremely trending. والنهارده مبسوطة جدا 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 و honored انه a huge expert and a thought leader معانا زي دكتور محمد إيهاب. honestly medical insiders يعني اللي مش عارفها هي very 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 interesting وحاجة عظيمة جدا ان هو بيقدم ال medical affairs برضو education بشكل really 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 interesting و really really impressive. فخليني اعرفكم عن دكتور محمد. دكتور محمد هو experience كبيرة جدا as an MSL especially في ال area of oncology و hematology. He worked in a lot of international companies in addition بقى to being the co-founder of Medical Insiders. وهو كمان certified trainer from the AUC. فالنهاردة هنستفاد كتير جدا جدا من خبرته. والنهاردة التوبيك بتاعنا really interesting، I hope you enjoy it. ومبسوطين انك معانا يا دكتور محمد. اتفضل.
Thank you, Alina, and thank you for the nice introduction.
Thank you so much.
يعني thank you for the research hub for hosting me today. I think زي ما انت اتكلمتي احنا التوبيك بتاعنا النهارده هو ال RWE Bridge او ازاي ال MSLs بيقدروا يستخدموا real world evidence to fill the data gaps. To start with خليني في الأول أعرفكم على نفسي سريعا. أنا اسمي محمد إيهاب، حاليا بشتغل Oncology Hematology Medical Affairs Advisor في شركة سيرفي ايجيبت، و at the same time أنا Medical Affairs Professional Trainer and Coach في Medical Insiders. والنهاردة I'm presenting only Medical Insiders. I'm not representing Servier at all. Regarding my professional background, أنا اتخرجت من كلية صيدلة جامعة القاهرة the Clinical Pharmacy Program, and then I started my career في AstraZeneca, then moved to Mundi Pharma, Amgen, Eli Lilly, and finally Servier. أنا بدأت البداية الطبيعية اللي أغلب الصيادلة بيبدأوها في شركات الأدوية كميديكال ريبريزنتيف، وبعد كده I got my first promotion in medical affairs. Then I worked for part of my career field training and then back to the medical affairs. Regarding my academic background, I did some postgrad studies, but I decided to pursue it in business. So I did my Master of Business Administration في الجامعة الأمريكية. و at that time ابتديت أشتغل part time teacher assistant لل strategic marketing domain في ال School of Business. و I did some postgrad studies ليها علاقة بالtraining زي ال PCT أو Professional Certified Trainer. و I studied biostatistics for non-biostaticians. و at that time ابتديت ألاقي حبي towards teaching. So I decided to pursue teaching في شغلانتي في الميديكال affairs. ف we started Medical Insiders في سنة 2021. وزي ما الريسيرش هاب هي leading entity في ال trainings والdevelopmental program للclinical research. ف we claim إن we are the leading entity في ال trainings اللي ليها علاقة بالميديكال affairs mainly للميديكال science liaisons أو للMSLs. الأول أنا حابب أشكركم for deciding to join this webinar، لأنه في الآخر أعتقد إنه معظم الناس it's not a requirement. مفيش حد منكم في شغلكم أو في جامعاتكم طالب منكم إن أنتوا تحضروها، ولكن أوكي في حد بيطلب مننا إن هي تكون in English. Okay. And I just wanted to start by thanking you for joining this webinar, because I think none of you is obligated to attend this webinar. It's not required by your managers or by your universities. I think it's mainly for the soul of education. And as Steve Jobs said, only people with passion can change the world for better. So we do promise you that we will make this webinar as much as we can reach for you, and it will be meeting your expectations. So what we will be discussing today is mainly introduction to what is the MSL role. Maybe you have heard about the medical science liaison or the role of an MSL within the pharmaceutical companies. So what is this role? And our topic today, what's the role of the evidence generation in the medical affairs strategy, and how do the MSLs use the evidence generation to fill the data gaps? So to start with, I think it's very important to highlight the value chain of the pharmaceutical industry, or in other words, how does the pharmaceutical industry operates? Usually it starts with the R&D, the research and development, where the scientists are having many trials and most of their time in the research labs trying to sift through tons of molecules to be able to identify what molecules can add value to the other molecules that's already in the market in terms of efficacy or safety or convenience, and also to try to find the molecules that could be available for commercialization. And we do mean by availability for commercialization that those molecules could be massively produced and could be stored and could be transported. They do this via the in vitro and the in vivo studies. And as you know, the in vitro studies are that you're trying to understand what the molecule is doing at an isolated organ level in the test tube, and in the vivo it means in the living organism. So inside the living organism, how is it functioning? And also for the recent graduates, I think there is one more topic that's added to the list. It's not only in vitro, in vivo, now it's also the in silico trials. And how can we use the computer models to predict the safety and efficacy of the molecules? I think this is one of the main reasons that led to reducing the lead times from bench to launch, from the ideation of the molecules until they reach the consumer in the market. The in silico trials supported this a lot. After the R&D, it comes the preclinical trials, where we are studying the molecules on animals, but here they are more developed animals that simulate the human beings, for example, the monkeys. After testing the molecules on the animals, we go for the clinical development and for the human trials. And as you know, there are 4 stages or 4 phases of the clinical trials before the marketing authorization or before the drug is approved to be there in the market. We do have the phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials, and I think they will be detailed further by Lena. And after the clinical development, or after the results of the phase 3 clinical trials, here starts the role of the medical affairs or the medical science liaisons in what's called the launch readiness. So for the launch readiness, all what the medical affairs teams and the MSLs are trying to do is to pave the way for the launch of the new molecule. They are trying to raise the bar of the education and awareness among the healthcare professionals and among the patients about the disease and the upcoming molecules. If we took an example about the osteoporosis, so if your pharmaceutical company is launching a medication about osteoporosis next year, so the medical affairs team starts to do the education 1 year ahead before the launch. So they are trying to raise the awareness about the clinical value of the new molecule and the added benefit. Also, they are trying to raise the education and awareness about how can the HCPs diagnose osteoporosis, because unfortunately, the osteoporosis is always diagnosed at a very late stage when the postmenopausal women are at very high risk of fractures. So how can the HCPs identify the high risk population and do the risk stratification to be able to identify the osteoporosis early on? Also, they are trying to do the education for the patients. So what are the risk factors that if the patient has, she needs to seek consultation and she need to do checkups? So for example, the age, the postmenopausal states, the calcium and vitamin D levels. This is the role of the medical affairs pre-launch, because if this was done pre-launch, we are quite more sure that when the product is launched, its uptake will be more and more enhanced. And then comes the role of the regulatory affairs teams who are submitting for the drug approvals and for the marketing authorization with the Ministry of Health. And then comes the role of the sales teams and the different core business functions within the pharmaceutical industry, sales, marketing, and market access, where they are trying to promote for the clinical value of the treatment. We does not stop here. We also pursue the post-marketing research, and I think it will be detailed by Lena as well about the real-world evidence and the phase 4 clinical trials that are carried out post the marketing authorization. From this slide, I just wanted to highlight for you that the medical affairs and the MSLs, they have roles pre-marketing authorization, before the launch, and after the marketing authorization, after the launch. So talking about the medical office general structure, usually, as you know, for each pharmaceutical company globally, they do have the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, and reporting to the CEO, we have the C-suite or the CXO. So we have the Chief HR officer, the chief marketing officer, the chief operations officer, and also we have the chief medical officer. And reporting to the chief medical officer, there are multiple functions. One of them is the medical affairs function, and the entry level for the medical affairs function is the medical science liaison. And after the medical science liaison, you're a medical advisor, and then medical manager or therapy area lead, and then medical director. And then you move to the global roles and the regional roles. Our focus is for the medical science liaison, and especially for this role, it's not a new role. We are hearing about this role intensively today and these days. However, this role started in 1967. It started in USA by a pharmaceutical company called Upjohn, which is now a part of Pfizer. It's a Pfizer division. And this role, it started early on with a different scope than what it's done today. So usually this function started for many reasons. First of all, the USA governorate had some compliance restrictions that needs a strict separation between the medical and commercial activities. So you cannot be the marketing body who is doing the promotional material and at the same time you are approving the promotional material. We need another judge that's not biased and do not have promotional intentions. That's why we need to separate the medical function from the promotional functions. So they needed an MSL. Also, the broader stakeholder base. Nowadays, the decision makers for the treatments are not only the doctors, they are not only the physicians. We do have the regulators, the payers who are approving the reimbursement of the medications in the different healthcare systems, the nurses. Also, the patients now are very different from many years back. You know that the patients now have the social media and the AI, and they do search for the treatments and their side effects. So nowadays, the patients are not only recipients of the healthcare, they are active contributors in their own care and they need education as well. The medical affairs is the function that does the patient education. Also, since the stakeholders now are seeking more authenticity and unbiased information that are not only promotional, there is a higher need for the medical affairs and the MSL function because those people have no sales targets. All what they are doing that they are trying to deliver unbiased and fair balanced medical communications. Also nowadays, and this is the part of what Lena will talk about, there is a rising need for more proof. We need to demonstrate the real world value across the product life cycle beyond the controlled clinical trials. Also, since the launches are becoming the norm of today and new medications are coming in every therapeutic area, nowadays, you can see that each pharmaceutical company is launching 4 to 5 medications per year, and there is no learning syllabus that can accommodate for all of those updates. So the doctors are having their bachelor's and then their master degree and even the PhD, but after they get the primary education, there is increasing demand for the secondary education, for the updates that are there in the guidelines, in the new treatments that are there in the market. So the medical affairs function is the function that's driving the secondary education for the HCPs. And nowadays, the function of the medical affairs is simply insights loop. So what they are trying to do is that they are trying to bridge the gap between the R&D that's represented in the clinical trials and the published literature, and also the business where it comes to the clinical practice and the commercial team. How do they bridge this gap? Through the evidence, through the data communication. So each day an MSL is taking up-to-date medical information and he is doing the data communication externally with the key opinion leaders or the most eminent doctors. And then they are asking the doctors for their insights, and this is the second step, the insights generation. And then they are taking these insights back internally to the internal cross-functional teams, and then the next day they take more up-to-date medical information, they do communicate it externally to get insights and to transmit the insights internally in the insights loop. Also, they are responsible for the execution of the medical strategies for the launch readiness, for preparing for the new launches, just like the example of the osteoporosis I updated for you, and also the data generation on the local or the regional level or the real world evidence that will be the topic of lead. So Talking about the evidence generation, you will find that always the medical affairs strategy is trying to bridge the gap between two states. The first state is the status quo that's there in the market. What do we have in the market? And we need to reach the desired state. And going back to the example of the osteoporosis, the status quo is that there is lack of awareness among the patients about the risk factors for osteoporosis. There is lack of awareness among the HCPs on how to identify the high-risk population. There is lack of awareness at the hospitals on how to pursue the tests for and the checkups for checking the bone mineral density, how to do the DEXA scans. Do we have the necessary devices that we need to have to be able to do the DEXA scans and to make sure that the bone mineral density for this patient is good? So this is the status quo. The desired state that we need to reach is that we need to have more awareness among the patients and among the HCPs on the osteoporosis, the risk stratification, and how to do the checkups. And sometimes to bridge the gap between the status quo and the desired states, we need to have data. And this is the role of the evidence generation. So usually, sometimes in the medical affairs strategy, our goal is to generate evidence, to have data. So how do the MSLs fill the data gaps? Usually this comes in 3 steps. The first step is to identify what are the data gaps, what are the areas that needs evidence generation. And then comes the next part where we reach out to Lena. Please, Lena, we have those gaps. Can you generate evidence for us on those unmet medical needs and evidence gaps? And then after Lena generates the evidence, we do the data communication, just like what I told you about the MSL role. We do the data communication externally with the key opinion leaders or the big doctors, and then we get their insights and transmit these insights internally. So let's talk about the first step. How can we identify the data gaps, or what are the data gaps that we need to unleash or uncover? So these are only examples. Sometimes we have data gaps about the epidemiology. What is the incidence of the disease? What's the prevalence? What's the mortality rate? So the incidence of the disease is the number of the new cases reported of a certain disease each year. So for example, if we are talking about the breast cancer, what's the incidence of breast cancer in Egypt? Do we have 6,000 cases that are having breast cancer each year, or we have 60,000 patients? We need to have the figure to be able to identify more the disease burden and how many patients are affected each year. The prevalence is the number of the old plus new cases that's reported of a certain disease over a certain time period, usually 5 years. So we need to understand more how the breast cancer is not only common or is not only occurring each year. We need to have the history of the breast cancer. How many patients are affected by breast cancer over 5 years, for example, and not only 1 year. And also we need to understand the mortality. What's the mortality rate for breast cancer? Out of the 10 patients diagnosed with breast cancer each year, how many of them can have their normal lives, and unfortunately, how many of them do pass away? So sometimes we need to have more data on the epidemiology, like the incidence, prevalence, or mortality, or more times we need to have more evidence when it comes to the clinical practice. So the clinical evidence gaps, and this is the second pillar. And usually this is the pillar that's in focus in medical affairs. As you know, the randomized controlled clinical trials or the phase 3 clinical trials, they are really good and they are on huge number of patients and for long duration of time. However, they are controlled trials. We need to see the outcomes of the treatments in the real clinical practice, in the clinics and in the tertiary centers. So there is an evidence gap usually about the clinical practice versus the clinical trials. So we do ask Lena, please, we need to generate data on the real world clinical practice of the medication X versus the medication Y that's confirming what happened in the clinical trials. So please, can you pursue this clinical trial for us, or this observational trial for us? Another gap could be the long-term outcomes. For example, in the clinical trial, the phase 3 pivotal clinical trial, we do have the efficacy and safety profile of the medication for 1 year. We are not sure that this efficacy profile is maintained and sustained over 10 years. we're not sure that the safety profile of the medication is good over 10 years. So we need to generate more data to make sure that the product is safe and effective on the long term as well. Sometimes we do have comparisons of the medication versus placebo. We do not have the comparison versus another medication. So we have an evidence gap about the comparative effectiveness of the medication X versus medication Y. We only have data on medication X versus placebo and medication Y versus placebo. So we go again back to Lena. Lena, please, we need to have a real-world evidence study or a comparative efficacy study between product X and product Y head-to-head. Sometimes we need to generate data on subpopulations or some cohort of patients. So we reach out to Lena. Lena, please, we need to have a patient registry on not all the dyslipidemia patients that were included in the trial. We need only to have the data with more focus on the familiar hypercholesterolemia patients, this subgroup or subpopulation of the bigger population. We need to study those patients more. Sometimes we need to have data on the treatment patterns. So for a diabetic patient, should we start with metformin and then if the patient is not controlled, we need to ask to add SGLT2 inhibitors, and then we can go for the third line with the GLP-1 inhibitors. What's the treatment paradigm that should be followed? What's the pattern and the algorithm of the treatment? So we need, again, to reach out to Lena again, we need to generate data on the treatment patterns. Sometimes we need to generate data on the adherence. As you know, most of the dyslipidemia patients, they should have statins for life. This is a chronic condition, but we don't know in Egypt, are the patient adherent to the treatment chronically for their life, or they are taking the treatments for only 3 months or only 6 months? We need to have this data to be able to tailor our medical strategies. Should we generate more efforts on the medical education for the patients on the adherence aspect or not? We need to identify this gap. So we reach out to Lena, please, we need to generate data on the adherence of the patients. Sometimes we have a third pillar, that's the patient-centric and the quality of life gaps. Sometimes we do not only want to extend the survival of a breast cancer patient by 1 year. We need to make sure that the quality of life of this patient and the symptom burden is controlled, and that the patient is having a good health-related quality of life. So we do not want the patient only to live more. We want the patient to live more with less pain and more ability to carry out the daily activities and to go to work. So we will ask Lena again to generate for us patient-reported outcomes and to do surveys with the patients to ask them about their quality of life. Sometimes, and this is very important in the reimbursement or when we are trying to do introductions for the medications in the national health insurance, the universal health insurance, in the tenders generally, we need to have and to fill the gaps of the health economics and outcomes research gaps. Sometimes the government is not acknowledging that osteoporosis is one of the therapy areas that's on our focus list. We need to treat patients that are having cancers, for example, and are having multiple sclerosis. So we may reach out to Lena. Lena, please, we need to generate evidence on the cost of illness. What's the cost of the government not treating osteoporosis? Many patients are having fractures and they are having operations, and for those operations they are costing the government X and Y, so the government needs to treat the osteoporosis early on to save those budgets that they are not aware of. So this is one type of the health economics and outcomes research, the cost of illness, also the cost effectiveness. Sometimes the more costly and more pricey medications are having higher value. For an example, let's say that medication X costs $1,000 per year, and medication Y costs only $500 per year. For the first instance, it may be that medication X is more expensive than medication Y. But if we dig deeper into the data and we had a cost effectiveness study, maybe we can find that medication X that's costing $1,000 per year, the patients are free of hospitalization throughout this year. But for medication Y that's costing less, only $500 per year, the patient had 3 hospitalization and each hospitalization is costing $1,000. So the net cost for product X is only the $1,000, but the net cost for product Y is the 500 plus 3 multiplied by 1,000. So it's 3,500. So if we dig deeper into the data and the outcomes, we can find that although medication X is more expensive than medication Y, however, medication X is more cost effective than medication Y. Also, sometimes we need to do budget impact studies where we are not only assessing the price of the medications, we are assessing multiple things. For example, if a medication is taken intravenously, it has more costs because there are costs for the admission of the patients in the unit where they will administer the medication, the costs of the medical supervision from the doctors, the cost of the administration by the nurse. But if we have another medication that's oral, definitely it will have more budget impact and more cost savings. So these are areas where sometimes we need to unleash and to fill the data gaps. So we identify in each therapeutic area what are the data gaps that we are having. So for example, we need to have an incidence study, we need to have a study about the long-term outcomes, we need to have a study about the cost of illness. So we reach out to Lena, please Lena, we need to have those studies. And after Lena generates the evidence, we need to communicate the evidence. So the third pillar after the evidence is generated is the data communication. For the data communication, we do have and we do start from the key medical insights that tells us that there is a need for education about, for example, the incidence of the breast cancer in Egypt and the long-term outcomes of the medication and also the cost of illness. So based on these key medical insights, we do the scientific data disclosure. We are communicating to the HCPs and to the payers the outcomes of the studies that Lena carried out, and we are showing them the publications and the data. And then we are asking them some key business questions to generate more and more insights to be able to formulate our scientific data disclosure for the next communications with the HCPs. This is briefly what we are doing when we are trying to fill the data gaps. So to sum it up, first of all, we are trying to utilize the evidence generation to fulfill our medical affairs strategy. And to set our medical affairs strategy, we are assessing the status quo and what are the desired states and the objectives that we need to have. For this, we will need to generate evidence. And for the evidence, we have 3 pillars. First of all, what are the data gaps? And then comes the second step, the evidence generation through the research hub and the CROs. And then we have the third pillar, which is the data communication of the generated evidence. This was everything for my part. And I'd like to thank you very much for your time and for the research hub for inviting me. These are my contact details. If at any time you needed to reach out, this is my email and my mobile number. And also, if you wanted to dig deeper into the medical affairs function and the MSL role, and you want to know more about Medical Insiders and the programs we are providing, this link tree will provide you with our website, the different programs you are having, and all the data that you might need to have. Thank you very much. And please, if you have any questions, I'm there for you. And if you do not have questions, the floor is yours, Lee.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. Those info was really, really interesting. Thank you for the amazing insights. It really sums it up and clarifies how the MSLs fills the data gap and generates evidence. Now we will share the clinical research aspect. So let me share my screen. Okay. So is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Mohammed touched base with clinical trials at many points during his discussion. So let me clarify first what is a clinical trial to understand the base of the topic and understand everything from the foundation. So starting of what is a clinical trial? So it's a study that is performed to investigate, and let's put under investigate multiple lines because we are investigating something. We are seeing if it works or not, if it's safe or not, if it's effective or not. So we're investigating the safety or efficacy of a medicine. For human medicines, these studies are carried out definitely in human volunteers. That's the word clinical trial. Clinical, it means that it's performed on human volunteers or human subjects or patients. So the clinical trial must be conducted, of course, with our main reference, and the gold standard of our practice is the GCP principles, the good clinical practice. And it's really important for anyone who's starting his career or practicing clinical research to have the GCP certificate and understand how to apply the GCP principles. So clinical trials conducted in accordance to the ICH E6 GCP principles. Why is that? To help assure the rights, safety, and well-being of trials participants. These principles help us maintain a controlled environment of the clinical trial to protect the subjects and the patients, protect their safety, their privacy, their data, their well-being, and so on. And there is a huge history behind creating this GCP principle, but let us say that this exact principles was conducted and created after the Declaration of Helsinki. And if you want to dig deeper into that, just search with Declaration of Helsinki and you'll see the history behind what are the GCP principles and why did they evolve. Okay, so speaking of the clinical trial life cycle, so this is just a simple illustration of the clinical trial life cycle. First of all, we have a compound, a targeted ID or a chemical structure that we want to investigate. So as Dr. Mohamed said, we investigated first in the lab, on a cell line, on a in vivo setting. We see the target, we do the compound screening, and this is called the preclinical testing. And this stage is called the discovery and development. And then after we get some approvals on this chemical compound that is worth it to investigate more, we can do also the animal testing, and then the IRB approvals and the regulatory approvals like FDA or EMA in Europe or EDA in Egypt or SAFDA in Saudi Arabia. And then after they approve the clinical trial, we start doing phase 1 clinical trial. And phase 1 focuses only on one thing, which is the safety and dosage. We're not looking for efficacy, we're not seeing if the drug works, we're just focusing on one thing, which is that this drug is safe. So that's why we do it on healthy volunteers, not patients. And those healthy volunteers are ranging from 20 to 50 subjects or 20 to 80 subjects. And we also check for the pharmacokinetics of the drug to see at which dose this drug is safe. So we give the subject or the healthy volunteer multiple doses, and we check at which dose this drug is safe. And that moves us into the phase 2 clinical trial. So we take the results from phase 1 and move into phase 2 clinical trial to see the efficacy and also the side effects again. And this time, the number of healthy volunteers is much higher. It can range from 100 to 300 subjects or healthy volunteers. And in this phase 2 trial, we check for those doses that we took from phase 1 to check which of these doses is effective to this subject. Which dose will treat the disease with minimal side effects. And why is that? Because sometimes there might be a small dose and there's no need to give a high dose for the drug to be effective. So that's why we give a range of doses to investigate this. After we finish the phase 2 trial, we move into the phase 3 trial. And also in the middle, of course, we get the regulatory approvals. And when we move into the phase 3 clinical trials, phase 3 main focus is confirming efficacy. We want to confirm that the drug is effective in a larger population, which is a larger patient. And now here we started using the word patient. And in phase 3 trials, it must be done on patients, not healthy volunteers. So in this phase 3 trial, we perform it on thousands and thousands of patients. It can be also done on multiple sites and multiple countries. So this is phase 3. We focus on confirming the efficacy, and we can compare it also to the common standard care or the common treatment that is used to treat this drug. And then after we finish the phase 3 trials and we have the data, we get the regulatory approvals for the drug to enter the market. So, which we call the market authorization. So when the drug is on the market and we need to see if this drug is safe on the long term, that's when we do the post-marketing and phase 4 study. And in this phase 4, which we call post-marketing, which means that after the drug is in the market, we check for the long-term safety. We make sure that the patients, when they take it for years, that they are safe and the drug that doesn't have any surprising side effects. And this is also where the real-world evidence can be done. And as you see, it's a really, really lengthy process. It's a really long process. It often takes from 10 to 12 years for a single drug to move from step 1 to step 6. So the clinical trial life cycle is not really short, it's really long. That's why sometimes we start with a real world evidence, if a drug is already in the market, to get some insights about if it's worth it to do a phase 3 to compare it with another drug or not. Okay, so this is again the stage 1 of discovery and development. Just wanted to show you that for every 10,000 compounds discovered, only 10 to 25 might move from the lab or the bench side to the phase 1. So it's really important that we understand this process and appreciate the teams and the people and the effort behind a drug being simply put into the market. Okay, these are the phases. Again, I just summarized it for you in a table to have also an overview. So as we said, phase 1 is mostly focused on safety and dosage with a small number of healthy volunteers. And then phase 2 focuses on the efficacy and side effects and has more people, 100 to 300 healthy volunteers, and we monitor the side effects and we see the most effective dosage. And then phase 3, which can range from 300 to 3,000 or 5,000 patients. It's a large-scale testing and it must be done on patients and not healthy volunteers. And we monitor the efficacy and adverse event, and when we get the approval from phase 4, we can put the drug or the medicine in the market. And lastly, the phase 4, post-marketing surveillance, it can be done on thousands and thousands of people. It's mostly a population-based study. And we see the long-term safety of this drug. Just again, for you to have an insight of how this is done. So first of all, we create a clinical protocol. And we design the study by putting it into a study design and developing the protocol. So who writes the protocol? The medical writer. It's a joint task between the medical writer, the CRO, which is the clinical research organization, and the data management. And of course, the medical writer or the data management can be from the sponsor's team, which is the pharmaceutical company's team. So the pharmaceutical company or the sponsor can be the one who initiated the idea of this study, and they go to the CRO to conduct it for them, to prevent any bias or promotion. Number 2, which is the approvals, we get the approvals from what we call the gates, which are the IRB, ethics and regulatory committees like FDA, ADA, EMA, and Saudi Arabian FDA. So let's talk more about real-world evidence, which is our topic for today. Real-world evidence is derived from real-world data. What does real-world data mean? It means that it's data that is found in clinical practice and it's unchanged. We don't touch it. We don't intervene by any way. We don't go and give the patient something. We don't go and make the patient do some tests or take blood samples from them. It's just the normal clinical practice that is performed in hospitals, clinics, or sites. And then we take those data from the hospital registries or the claims of insurance companies, or we take it from the data management systems of these hospitals, and then we monitor the safety and efficacy of this drug. So it has become a pivotal element in healthcare. Why? Because it is shaping now how medical affairs teams and MSLs approach evidence generation, healthcare policies, engagement, and internal strategic alignment. And there is a huge growth if you go into and search for on clinicaltrials.gov for real-world evidence studies. You'll see that in the past 3 to 5 years, it has been a really increasing. It has increasing focus, and more people are doing real-world evidence because it's shorter and much cheaper also. Okay, so this is just an illustration of how we perform real-world evidence again. So the idea is, do you see those 3 men on the left? They are wearing the same cloth. And this is what actually happens in clinical trials. We have a really controlled environment, a really strict inclusion and exclusion criteria. We select really specific patients to do the clinical trial on them, and there isn't any diversity, and we don't see how the drug is performing in a natural setting, which the real-world evidence comes in handy. You see on the right, there are many people wearing different clothes and doing different things, and there are many factors contributing on their physiology, on their way of life, their lifestyle, and so on. And this is what we are trying to see how the drug is performing within the real-world setting. Okay? في حد بيقول we have a problem in the sound. Can you hear me now? Or is still a problem? Okay, Dr. Aya, if you can log out and in again, so it's probably an issue. Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving back to real-world evidence. So as we said, it considers the full patient journey and social determinants of health, and it gives us more broader insights and more greater insights. Where do we get this data? From electronic medical records from hospitals, from hospital and pharmacy data, from patient registries, and now we have new technologies like the watches, the wearable devices, and health apps that the patient can go in and put their data and so on. What is the value of real-world evidence? What does it add to the clinical research world? It gives us 30% acceleration in study timelines. As I've mentioned earlier, the phases take years and years. So the real-world evidence saves us a lot of time by reducing the time by 30% when integrating a real-world evidence design into the clinical life cycle phase. So it's right now real-world evidence is a strategy, not just a practice that is overseen. Okay, so you might have a question in your mind now on what is the difference between phase 3 and phase 4 real-world evidence trials. So phase 3 is strictly controlled, and we check for the efficacy if the drug works. But the real-world evidence, or phase 4, we focus on the routine practice, which is the effectiveness. The effectiveness is how the drug performs in real-life setting. And the population, for the phase 3, we have narrow eligibility or homogeneous group of patients, but for the phase 3 or phase real-world evidence, we have broader patient mix, so it's a heterogeneous group. And for the design, the phase 3 is prospective, so it's happening in the future, and it's interventional. I'm intervening, I'm giving the patient something. But the phase 4 and real-world evidence, it's only observational. I'm observing how the patients are reacting to the normal clinical practice by using this medicine, and it's registry-based. Our goal for the phase 3 trials is getting the regulatory approvals for the drug to go into the market. But for phase 4, our goal is safety, payer value, and label expansion. Okay? And again, you might be questioning, is there a difference between phase 4 and real-world evidence? Yes. Phase 4, both can be intersected together, but it's not the same thing all the time. Phase 4 is a bit more controlled. Yes, it's a post-marketing surveillance study, but it's more controlled, and we have a bit strict inclusion and exclusion criteria and study setting. While real world evidence, it's unfiltered, it's unaltered. We don't change anything of the routine, of the flow of the routine clinical practice. And you will definitely see that the real world evidence has more number than the phase 4. Phase 4 can be thousands, but real world evidence can reach millions of people being studied. And the second thing is the bias and confounding. The phase 4 is typically expensive, requiring formal also site activation, and it requires approvals and patient recruitment, while real-world evidence, it's often faster, more cost-effective, and it leverages pre-existing data that's already there in the registries. We don't set up a data capture system, it's already there. So this is the difference between phase 4 and real-world evidence. This is just an overview, This is just an overview on when we increase the population, the more we increase the population, the more we go into observational studies, while the less we have in terms of the number of patients being tested, it's more into the randomized clinical trials and phase 3 trials. And this is also to show you the heterogeneous nature of the real-world evidence trials. It's different population, different people, different genders, different ages, different treatments, different outcomes, and different settings, which can be an advantage and a disadvantage because it creates bias and it has confounding factors, but there is a statistical model that is applied to overcome this bias. So what about the research implementation logic? What is the research implementation logic? So the real-world evidence is what builds the safety story, is what confirms and gives us the badge of safety, that this drug is safe in a normal setting. So it does the safety signal detection, comparative effectiveness to other drugs in the market, and we have, as we said, diverse patient journeys. Then how, as Dr. Mohamed said, that real-world evidence is filling the data gaps in healthcare. So first of all, as we said, diverse patient population, this fills a huge data gap by giving us, including a type of subjects that we don't normally involve in clinical trials, like elder people, pediatrics, and patients with multiple comorbidities. Usually those are excluded from clinical trials. So in real-world evidence, they are included with us. So this gives us an insight on how this drug will also perform in those patients. The second thing is on how real-world evidence fill the data gap is the long-term safety and rare risk. Sometimes a rare risk or a rare adverse event just appear out of nowhere that we didn't know of. That happens in the real-world evidence. That's why we perform real-world evidence. Number 3, we also check for the true patient adherence, on how the patient is compliant. Are the patient taking the drug? So in a clinical trial setting, in a controlled clinical trial setting, we monitor the patient compliance, make sure they take the drug. But in real-world evidence, it's impossible to do it on thousands and millions of patients. So it also gives us an insight on how the patient adhere to the drug, and what happens when they skip a dose or miss a refill or don't take the drug at all. And the fourth thing is the off-label usage. Sometimes the physicians start using the drug for other indications. So that also gives us an insight on what happens if you take the drug for another indication. This all comes from real-world evidence. And the last thing is head-to-head comparison, which delivers comparative effectiveness data between competing therapies in everyday clinical care. So what is the real-world evidence data ecosystem? The ecosystem is where do we get this data? As I said, from electronic health records, like routine, when you go to the hospital and visit a doctor, they take your vital signs, they take your blood pressure, your blood sugar, and so on. So there is an assessment. Or if you are admitted to the hospital, they also do some tests for you. So this is where we get the real-world evidence data. Also from patient registries, like the registries from the from the Ministry of Health. Also digital health tools, like I said, the wearable devices like the digital watch or the apps, which we call the patient reported outcomes, real time. We called it PRO. PRO is the real time patient reported outcomes. So back to the MSLs, how they are involved in clinical trial life cycle. Are they involved, or is it something isolated from medical affairs? No, they actually are involved. They act as the crucial scientific bridge between the pharmaceutical sponsor and the clinical investigator. So how they are involved? First of all, they are involved in site identification. When we begin the trial at the beginning, and here I'm talking about not real-world evidence. Here I'm talking about the phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. So in here, they take part in the site identification on how well this site is prepared for conducting a trial. Do they have the infrastructure? Do they have the experienced doctors to perform the clinical trials? And since MSLs are more involved with doctors and key opinion leaders, and they have a huge network, they help us find qualified investigators and assess site capabilities. Also, the second thing they take part in is scientific support, that they provide peer-to-peer education on the study protocol. They can take part in the protocol and on the drug info, like mechanism of action or complex medical queries. Also, they take part in the site engagement. Maintaining a relationship with an investigator is really important to keep the study on top of their mind and to keep the study in enrolling patients more and more. So they also take part in the site engagement, helping doctors enroll patients. And they also take part in the monitoring of the trial. So they can be involved in the meetings with CROs and clinical research team to make sure that the monitoring activities are performed in the most efficient way by the PI and the investigators in the sites and in the settings of the hospital. And the last thing, the data dissemination, is that after the data is out from the clinical trial, they translate it and they may take part in the clinical study report, and they share the trial results with the medical community and scientific community. They can later do consensus or a certain guidelines based on these trials. There is much that is done by the MSLs. In here, I wanted just to include something about the investigator-initiated trial, which is a type of clinical trials, which is investigator-initiated. What does that mean? Investigator-initiated, it means that it is initiated and started by a doctor, a physician, from the clinical practice. They notice something in their clinics, in their patients that are being treated with certain drugs, and they have an idea or a hypothesis or a research question in mind that they want to do a clinical trial for. So what they do is that they take this proposal and they give it to a sponsor, like any pharmaceutical company, and the pharmaceutical company give the investigator the fund to do this trial under the umbrella of the sponsor. And sometimes the investigator can do it alone as well by reaching to a CRO to conduct the trial for them. So how this is done? First of all, they use real-world population, and this is also another aspect of real-world evidence trials, is the investigator-initiated trials. Because it comes out from clinical practice, not a really controlled, limited environment. And it captures the local clinical practice patterns. Like if there's a certain practice in a specific country or for a specific population, or a specific clinical guidelines that is only used in this country, they can dig deeper and create a clinical trial to investigate this more. Also, they can investigate two drugs together, like novel combinations. Like they can give drug A and drug B together to see if it's more effective than giving drug A alone. So this is also the investigator-initiated trials. And what is the role of the MSL here? they act as the bridge. As we said, they maintain really good relationship with the investigators or the doctors. So they discuss these scientific gaps with the key opinion leaders, which are the doctors. And if the investigator has a unique concept, they submit this proposal to initiate a clinical trial. The last thing that we'll talk about today is building consensus. And most of you, of course, know what is a consensus, which is an agreement from thought leaders and key operational leaders, like the most famous or the most significant doctors in a certain country or a certain continent, and they sit together to come up with a consensus in the treatment of, let's say, osteoporosis. So this is a consensus. So consensus also helps us generate evidence and fill gap by, first of all, filling evidence gap by establishing an interim standards when a randomized clinical trial or a real-world evidence data is emerging. Secondly, they do it with a structured methodology. So to build a consensus, we use something called Delphi method, which is a step-by-step process that we have to go through to build this consensus. Number 3 is the clinical guidance, which is developing treatment algorithm for complex diseases. Sometimes there is a really complex or a rare disease that is untreated or not treated properly. So physicians or KOLs meet up and they come up with a consensus from their clinical practice to come up with the most efficient way to treat this disease. And the last thing is credibility. It provides us with a peer-endorsed rationale for safety and therapeutic value, because it comes out from real practiced and real experienced doctors. We don't choose any random doctors. We choose thought leaders that have been using their practice for tens and tens of years. So it's not really haphazard, creating a consensus. So again, thank you so much. I hope I was brief, helpful, and to the point. I'm so sorry again for my voice. I'm a bit sick, so I'm so sorry if you had any trouble with the voice. But right now, if you have any questions, please put it in the comment box. And apologies if we are only speaking in English because we have non-Arabic speakers here. So hopefully I was understandable. And we have one question here from Dr. Aya. What factors do you think can affect the results in real-world evidence? That's a really good question, because as I said, we have a bias and confounding factors. Like, for example, if the patient is taking the drug that we are investigating, and he's taking another drug that is canceling the action of this drug. So there is a contraindication. There is an interaction here. So drug interactions, contraindications, comorbidities that the patients have, all are factors that can affect the real-world evidence. But again, we have statistical methods to help us reduce this bias as much as we can. That's why we use a huge sample size. And when we use a huge sample size in real-world evidence, that helps us in overcoming this bias and overcoming these confounding factors. Do anyone have any other questions for me or Dr. Mohamed? Okay, you highlighted the role of MSL in clinical trial. Does it mean you don't see clinical trial license in the region? Honestly, it's not a lot. Since I work in an international setting, I see MSLs being involved, but honestly, I haven't seen it being done in local trials a lot. It might be there, but I haven't seen it honestly in the region or locally. But maybe Dr. Mohamed can answer this question as well, if he has an idea.
Same goes.
Your voice broke, Dr. Mohamed.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, same goes for me. I think most of the pharmaceutical companies in the region, they are having medical affairs team, and they are purely outsourcing the clinical research operations for CROs.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Do anyone have any other questions? Feel free to ask. Okay. My question to Dr. Mohammed: how can we find a job opportunity for MSL, the skills needed certificates courses in Egypt and Gulf?
Okay, I think we need first of all to agree on that the medical science liaison, although it's the entry level in medical affairs, however, it's considered a managerial position. So it's not very easy to find an MSL position. And for this, you need to have a definite set of competencies. First of all, you need to have the KOLs management. How can you handle the key opinion leaders and the eminent doctors and to run the discussions with them? And this comes with the presentation, communication skills, the questioning techniques, and whatsoever. Second of all, you need to have the cross-functional alignment because the medical science liaison is having multiple communications with different internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. Also, it's very important to have the leadership without authority because at the end of the day, you are not the direct manager of the medical representatives. However, you should have the medical influence and the leadership without authority that makes them really relying on you when it comes to the medical data and the scientific updates and the off-label questions. Last but not least, for sure, since the medical function is a strategic partner, you need to have the strategic thinking and resource allocation. This is one thing. I think for the certifications, there are many certifications for medical affairs. One of them is provided by Medical Insiders. It's the Introductory Medical Affairs Certification, and it's accredited and certified by the CPD United Kingdom. And also, there are some other very good companies that are providing those certifications, not only Medical Insiders, like the ACMA or the American Council for Medical Affairs. You can reach out to both companies. And I think for us, we are already there in Egypt and in the Gulf, in the UAE on site. We have our programs that are delivered on site. Also, we have other programs that are delivered virtually, so you can attend them. But I think the educational part is very important, but we have some other important aspects. The exposure is very important. Your publicity on the social media and building the network. Sometimes people in Arabic words, they say it's wasta. However, it's networking and to expand your reach to people in the medical affairs. This is very important. And also, I think the experience is very important. So you need to have, if you can have internships in medical affairs, if you can have multiple presentations about the clinical trials and the clinical data and communications with the HCPs, this is very important. And that what justifies why most of the medical science liaison in the region, they are coming from medical sales representatives background because they do have the KOLs management, the cross-functional alignment capabilities. So generally, I do prefer that you follow the 3 E's of the learning journey. First E is the education through the certifications, and the second E is the exposure through your publicity and your expanding the network and reach. And third, if you can have the experience via internships.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mohammed. I hope that answered your question, Dr. Ahmed. Any other questions? Okay, this is just how to stay in touch with us. This is our LinkedIn profile and WhatsApp community. We share job opportunities, most recent updates in clinical research, and much more. So if you'd like to follow us, and also to go into LinkedIn and take a look at Medical Insiders. They are amazing. They're doing a great job, and we are a huge fan of them. So thank you again, Dr. Mohammed, for the great insights and for participating in today's webinar. We're really honored to have you. And good night to everyone.
Thank you very much, Lina. It was my pleasure, and I will be there for you. I will leave my contact details on the WhatsApp group, and please, if you have any questions or you need any insights, you can reach out to me directly. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Goodbye.